Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor at USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. And thank you for being in class today. And our plan is to deliver actionable, useful training. And if you feel that you have not received at least one bit of training in each of our classes, Monday through Friday, on the bottom of your radio, there is an address. And you can write that address on a prepaid, self-addressed, stamped envelope and request a full refund for the amount that you paid for your class. And that has been approved by the board of directors of USA Prepares, because the board has decided that entertainment is not what we're about. We're about education, which is something that we've always been about. So I'm delighted to be broadcasting today. Hour number 1 is with Kyle. Hour number 2 is with Bert. And hour number 1, we're going to be talking about tools. This is the second class on tools and what you need to look for should you decide to buy some of these tools. And we're going to focus not little snippets, but in detail what you should look for. And that way you will not be making a mistake. And it will be based on actually over 100 years of combined experience with buying tools. Welcome, Kyle.
Good morning, Vince. I love your laugh. You know, you start your program all the time out with that, and it just sets the tone for everything, and I love it. You know, it's so fun.
Yeah, well, let me tell you the genesis of that. And I've only said it maybe once or twice. When I first started broadcasting, I was threatened by a government politician, a really, really high level guy. And he threatened me and he said that if I didn't stop broadcasting, if I didn't stop having Get Prepared Expos, he was going to expose me as someone who believed in UFOs, aliens, wanted to overthrow the U.S. government and something else. And I laughed at him. Yeah. And I said, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. He said he was going to call a press conference. And that's what these guys do. You know, these guys are used to saying, look at me, look at me. I'm talking about, politicians that beg for money, that, don't know much, and, they don't know science, and they don't know mechanics, and they don't know arithmetic. They know how to beg. And actually they go to a school. Literally, there's a school for beggars, and it's a political school, and they're taught how to go begging for money. So they can get their first job by, buying advertising, and then they can keep their job by begging for more money. But literally, they're taught how to, have press conferences and things. And he said he was going to have over 80 media outlets when he called the press conference just about me, about this guy on the radio who, believes in UFOs and aliens and I said, well, some of that stuff is true. But the part about, the armed insurrection, no, that's not true. And the violent overthrow of the United States government, well, that's not true. But the UFOs and aliens, actually, one of my instructors, we're off on a tangent, but one of my instructors was Carl Sagan, the world famous astronomer. And he taught us, they put this equation on the board at the university, and the equation said, if you look at this many planets and this many moons and this many solar systems and this many suns, you come up with the result of how many possible places like Earth are there. And with that many, how many would have life like ours? And how many of them would have an atmosphere like ours? And the answer is we would have to be arrogant and ignorant to think that we were the highest and best and the only in the entire universe. So do I believe in UFOs and aliens? I've never seen one, but do I think they could exist? Absolutely. And UFO stands for unidentified flying object. So it doesn't mean that it's a spaceship that's piloted by Martians or Venusians or something else. It just means that we don't know what it was. And I believe that there absolutely are UFOs. So that's I'm kind of off on a tangent, but that's
yeah, I'm almost sure I had a 5th grade teacher, and I'm almost sure he was an alien. Just teasing. But
so, Kyle, we're going to talk
tools.
We're going to talk about
jump into tools just a second. I got to tell you about my latest purchase, because after I was looking around at a pawn shop, and they had a box of a small box. It was probably about 2.5 inches wide and about 14 inches long. And it was rusty on the outside, but it said Montgomery Wards on the outside of it. And like I said, the box itself was kind of rusty. And I opened that thing up, and it had just a breaker bar, which is the way it came. It was a breaker bar, shallow, 12-point, and it said hardened sockets on them, hardened steel. And they had that entire set from 3/8 to 1 inch on there for $9. I couldn't believe it.
You're not going to believe this either. So last night I was searching for Montgomery Ward's Powercraft socket set. And literally. And the reason I was I have a set. It's a 1/4 inch, and I let a guy use the 1/4 inch breaker bar, and he just thought it was 12 inches long. It's more like 5 inches long, and he broke it. So I was looking for a replacement, and that Montgomery Ward's ratchet that I had from this would be like the 60s, I guess, and it was Powercraft lifetime guarantee, except there's no Montgomery Wards anymore to honor the warranty, but it is the finest fine-tooth 1/4 inch ratchet on the planet. So that's why I was looking for it. But very interesting. The commonalities of the things that we talk about and find, same days. I mean, unbelievable, uncanny. Kyle, I have on our list for today. This is the second in the series of tools. I have on our list a few things. One would be oil changing tools. Oil filter wrenches, drain pans, air tools, air hoses, and the maintenance of air tools, oiling them, etc. Where would you like to start?
We can start with oil filter wrenches, because in my opinion, there's a lot of ways to go with that, and I've sort of landed in 3 little categories and with oil filter wrenches. So when I had a diesel truck, I found a handle with it's got a loop on it, and it tightens up with if you turn it one direction, you can tighten it, and if you turn the wrench around and you tighten it down, it kind of cinches up around the oil filter, and it'll take stuff off. Well, and the handle articulates back and forth. So that's what I landed on for my diesel truck at the time when I had one, because it just was so incredibly handy. But I don't have a diesel anymore. I've got a regular gas engine, and they're a newer one. So, they're all General Motors, but, the engines in them are both 350 Chevys, and they have a smaller filter on them. And we have, 3 other cars around our place that all require these smaller filters. And what I have found is the smaller the filter, they don't require as much torque, seemingly, to be able to get them to come undone. And so they have these little caps that is like a sort of a giant socket, if you will, but it's made out of thin metal. And it's got and you just stick a ratchet extension, either a ratchet in there, or you can stick an extension in there if you got to kind of reach up to get it. Or like on our Toyotas, it fits in from the top, and you can just put that right over the end of it, bust it loose, and take your filter out real easily with these little capped units. I really like them. I have one other oil filter wrench that I use with my daughter, her car, when she comes over. Sometimes she'll come over and we'll change the oil together just to spend some time together and things. But anyway, and it has 3 notches in it. And it's for a smaller filter, medium-sized filter, and then a big filter. And it also blading handle. But it has become, for certain ones, that works out very well. And when you put on the side of the filter, it tends to crimp it. So if you do that, if you use that one in particular, you better make sure it's coming off, because it's going to destroy the filter if it doesn't. The rest of them won't destroy the filter, but this one in particular, if you really got to put some pressure against it and crimp it, make sure it's going to come off. If you ever come across one, which has only been one in my life, that I did not think, the guy must have put it on there with an impact wrench somehow, but I'd almost at the point where I wasn't sure I was going to get it off. And I was able to use that oil filter wrench, and I was crushing it before it broke loose.
Okay, now, would you say is this a 3-jaw adjustable oil filter wrench that you put a socket? Okay, and as you turn it, it gets tighter and tighter, and it squeezes against the oil filter can from the bottom of the can. Is that correct? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, there's 2 of them. The one that is like a large socket has a ratchet, and it fits on the bottom of the can. The other one the last one that I talked about there, has 3 jaws, and you move this little notch in or out depending on how big the filter is. And if it's a small filter, you can go to the small notch. And if it's a medium-sized filter, you could go like, say, a PH8A that used to be on the old style through Chevy 350s and 400s and stuff. Anyway, you would go to the medium-sized one. And if it's a diesel one, you go to the large one. And as you pull on that handle, it collapses around the filter, and it will, if you keep pulling and the filter's not moving, it will crush the filter. It puts so much torque on the side of the can of the filter.
Okay. That's what I thought you were saying. So the end cap wrenches, they look like jar lids, class, with a place to put a socket extension, like 3/8 of an inch socket extension. And our son came home with some from the Chinese factory tool outlet, and not one of them of the 6-piece set fit any oil filters we've ever used. And that would be foreign oil filters like Toyota and other brands, as well as U.S. So they haven't worked for us. Kyle's with us. This is the second class on tools for your consideration, tools that we think you might need if you decide to do the kinds of things in maintenance that we believe you should be actively learning more about if you haven't done it yet. So these oil filter end cap wrenches, they look like jar caps that you would put a socket extension into and turn it with a socket. And they have flat spots on it to correspond with the flats on the end of the oil filter. Well, the ones that came from the Chinese factory tool outlet years ago, there were probably 6 of them for maybe $10 or something. The dimensions were not right and they didn't work. But that doesn't mean you should paint all of these end cap oil filter wrenches with the same brush, because we have some made by a company called OEM, as in Original Equipment Manufacturer Tools, OEM Tools. And they are magnificent, absolutely magnificent. And I can't recommend OEM tools, OEM brand tools highly enough. I really like them. They're sold by AutoZone. You get them on Amazon. The oil filter wrench that I use most often is this. It's called it's the one Kyle was talking about. It's a strap. I'm sorry. It's a band wrench. A strap wrench is different. This is a band. It has a metal band. It has a flexible handle on it. And as you tighten it, as you pull this handle, it wraps this strap tighter and tighter and tighter against the outside of the oil filter. I've never had one crush except in one instance, and I'll tell you about that. They are the best, and they come in different sizes. So if you think one size is going to fit all, that is not the case, because they have a range of oil filter size. So if you're going to buy one of these, measure the diameter of your oil filter so you get the right one. They're about $5. You can get them at maybe $6 or $7 if you get one at AutoZone. You can also get them for a little more money from Amazon. I've never used the one with the 3 jaws. That makes sense. But I wanted to say that if you have a strap wrench, and if it's too big, and that was the case for me when I was younger and didn't have any money as a teenager, I had an oil filter wrench, the strap wrench. I'm sorry, the band wrench, and it was too big. So what I did was I took a socket, a deep well socket, and I placed it in the same orientation as the oil filter, between the oil filter and the band wrench. And that took up the extra space, and I was able to get the oil filter off. So that's a tip that you probably won't hear anywhere else except right here at USA Prepares. The next thing I wanted to talk about with Kyle is he had this oil filter that was really hard to get off. And that occurs when the guy before you works on a car and he does not put oil on the rubber O-ring or gasket when you tighten it down. And there's an art and a science to tightening these oil filters down. So if they over tighten them or they forget to put the oil on it, you're going to have a really tough time getting the oil filter off. And the oil that you use is the fresh oil that you put in your engine when you're filling it for that oil change. So you can take a Q-tip, or we put a rubber glove on and put a couple drops of oil on the tip of our finger with the glove, wipe it around the oil filter O-ring, and of course we clean the mating surface on the engine block so that there's going to be no leaks. We clean that with a clean paper towel over and over and over again, and then put a little bit of oil on that paper towel, and then make sure that there's no grit, grime, lint, etc., and that way you won't have any leaks. But Kyle, what have you done to get an oil filter off that just is impossible and look like this is going to be a bad thing? Because now you've already crushed it. And what do? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, Rat, putting a socket in the if your oil filter wrench is too big, because I have done that. But that was, like you said, it's really funny because I didn't even think about that until you said it. I did it way back in high school when I was in auto mechanics, and I was, always scraping to kind of come up with some extra money. And I did not have I bought a car, and I'd taken everything I had, and I was going to change the oil, but my oil filter wrench was too big, so I stuck a socket in there. One other time, as you were talking there, I happened to remember I was crushing. I actually had used this 3-jawed thing, and it was starting to crush it. And so I had I had a large, long screwdriver. And I thought, if I don't do something quick, I'm not going to get this thing off here. It's just going to fold in. So I drove a screwdriver right next to the engine block, as close to the front of the filter as I could get it.
Right back. Kyle's with us, and we're talking about tools that you should consider. And Kyle, so we had a stuck oil filter, and you couldn't get it off, and you used a screwdriver. How'd you use that?
Well, I got as close to the engine block as I could get it, and I drove it right through the oil filter. At the time, I could have plenty of room underneath there. It was a long, long time ago, and I should preface this to say it was only once in my entire life have I ever had to do this. And then as I got as close to the oil filter as I could, I had a long screwdriver. It must have been close to 2.5 feet long, and as one of those beater screwdrivers, and I still got it. That's probably, I've had that close to 50 years now. But anyway, I drove that thing in there, and I could put enough torque on it with the screwdriver that it broke loose. The interesting thing was, like you said, whoever had changed the oil before did not oil the little rubber seal that's on the bottom of the oil filter. And when I broke that loose, I'll never forget it, because it was my first time I'd ever seen that, that I took this thing off and I looked at that oil filter and I kept thinking to myself, my goodness gracious. And there was no seal on it. There, I looked at the top, where the oil filter meets up with the engine block, and I had looked at that and I thought, man, there's no seal on this thing. And it had stuck to the engine block. It was so tight. And so I gently took a knife and checked that. Once I got the seal started coming loose, it went ahead and come undone. But it was a little bit of a chore, but it wasn't anything compared to getting the canister off. I wanted to jump just for a second, Vince, back to those oil cap, the end cap filter wrenches. What I did when I was buying those, I went to the store, and I've got a Buick and a couple of Toyotas and then these 2 Chevys, and when they had a big sale on their filters, pull a bunch of those filters down, and I bought a bunch of them for all of them. And then as I looked at those oil filter wrenches, I made them fit. I found out which ones actually fit, because where I was at the time, at O'Reilly's, they had a whole bunch of, must have been 7 or 8 of them on the shelf, different sizes. And I made sure that they fit just like a socket would go on a bolt, for each one of them filters. And I only bought the ones that I needed. And one of the ones that I had also fit my daughter's car well. So don't just buy an assortment pack like Vince was just saying there. Don't do that. Make sure that the one that you get an actual oil filter in your hand at the auto parts store and the oil filter wrench, and fit it over the end of it and make sure it fits like a glove. Anyway,
very good.
Go ahead.
Very good. And that's what I was saying, that you can't paint all of these end cap oil filter wrenches with the same brush, because not all of them are junky. But Harbor Freight seems to have the patent on making substandard tools. Now, maybe they have improved them over the years, but the one that we have, the set, is worthless. I mean, we have 6 or 7 of these things that don't fit anything that we can figure that we could use them for. So that's one thing. The band wrench, I think, is the overall best. And I had the same exact experience. Had an oil filter. I couldn't get it off. I did exactly what you did. But I took an awl, which is a point. It's like a screwdriver, but it has a point. And it's Craftsman. And I poked a hole in the bottom of the oil filter to drain the oil out so I wouldn't get it all over me. And I caught that in a pan. The oil dripped for a while. And then I poked the screwdriver. Now, I used a sharp screwdriver to poke a hole through the side, from one side of the oil filter straight through the center to the other side of the oil filter. And then after I poked the hole with a sharp screwdriver, then I put a working screwdriver in there, a longer one, rounded shaft, because round would be better than a squared shaft screwdriver, so you don't tear up the oil filter even more. And then I was able to use the leverage of the long screwdriver through the oil filter to get it off. That's one way. And that only happened once. I tried another way, and I used a sharp-edged screwdriver, a wide blade one, and I tapped around the seam where the oil filter base meets the shell. Okay? That's closest to the engine block. And I thought I might be able to put a dent in the oil filter case seam, tap it tangentially so that I could put a little ding in it and use that as leverage to get that off. That's another way. But I did exactly what Kyle did, pushed the screwdriver through it. But you have to have room for that. And with modern, many of today's cars, there's not much room. Trucks, a little more room. But as Kyle said, the smaller oil filters, if you have if they're put on properly with the oil on the gasket, the rubber gasket, you're not going to have these problems. So my first choice is still the band wrench, and that's my go-to. But we have two different sizes, actually three different sizes that we use, like small, medium, and large. And I think you can get them on, here's one on Amazon, OEM Tools. It's called a swivel oil filter wrench. So it's fairly expensive in my book, $13.43, because I remember them being like $1.99. But that's when I bought mine, probably when Kyle was buying tools too. But I did see one at a yard sale for $1. It was marked $1, and I said, may I buy this? And I got that too. So anyway, that's it for oil filters, unless you have wrenches, unless you have something else, because we can go on to oil filter drain pans, which I think is important as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. What's your thought?
I have three different ones, those oil, but what you will find out, especially if you warm your engine up, before let's just say you're the average Joe Blow shade tree mechanic, you don't have a lift. If you drive your car up on some ramps, it's going to get you about a foot, 10 inches to a foot off of the ground. And it's best if you can drive your car up on 4 of them. But some people do not have the clearance under a lot of times to be able to get up enough height to get the rear wheels up. So you can do it with just the front wheels, but I don't prefer it that way if you can do it that way. But in any case, if you get your car up on the ramps, and you have to be very careful, don't overrun the ramps. I saw that one time. A friend of mine had actually done it, and I helped him get the car off of it. But anyway, he had to jack the car up to pull the ramp, and it didn't quite destroy the ramp, but it sure put a heck of a dent in it, a bend. We had to kind of bend it back. But so when you get your car up on the ramps, and you're going to be careful, because if the engine, that if the engine's hot, the oil is hotter. Whatever you can feel on the bottom of that pan, the oil is hotter. And it's going to be like, you get this all over you. Make sure you've got some kind of rubber gloves handy, and paper towels handy, or rags of some sort, to be able to get the oil off of you in a hurry, just in case because they call them accidents for a reason. They're not called planned destruction. They're actually just called accidents for a reason. So anyway, in case you have an accident and you get oil on you, you want to get that hot oil off as fast as possible. But anyway, you will learn there's kind of an art. You can use a extension with a socket on the end of it, and usually, unless you're careful, and once you learn, you'll be okay. But for a while, you're going to probably drop the oil filter plug, or the oil plug in the bottom of the pan. You're going to drop that in your pan because you're just going to move too fast, or you're not going to have the socket up around it deep enough. You're just going to make that mistake. And just, it's not the end of the world. It's as long as you've got an oil catch pan it's got a big hole in the middle, and it'll have a couple of small cross member pieces of plastic, so that major parts of debris, and I think they actually do it because people drop their plug from their oil pan a lot of times right into that oil pan. They don't want it to drop down in there, so they probably put those in there for that reason. But in any case, I like the oil pan. My favorite oil pan is one that is probably, I'm guessing, 18 inches wide and 2 feet or 24, 26 inches long. And it one side of it, if it's standing up, you're looking on the right side of it, if you got the whole, just to picture it here, and it drains toward the center from every direction. And I like those bigger ones myself, because when the oil comes running out of there, it's going to really be shooting ways out of the oil pan because it's hot liquid. But as it tends to drain down, that angle is going to change because there's not as much pressure pushing the oil out of your oil pan. And so when it's down, in terms of about I'm guessing a 14-inch spread between from the time it comes out till the time it's just dripping on the bottom of the oil pan. So anyway, excuse me. So that's my favorite one. And this one has a handle on the top of it, and it also has a big cap on the end so that if I want to put it into an oil jug or something to store the old used oil, because I use that for posts, wooden posts that I'm going to put in the ground, or I use it for ones, even I put it on 4x4s and let them soak for a few days and let that oil soak into the wood, even if I'm going to put them so that they're not, even if they're not below ground. I let that old oil soak into those posts, and then I'll put them up and use them. I have them on the lean-to of my shop, and those posts are sitting on top of concrete, but it sort of preserves them, and I've had them there for years. And I've had one that I had on one, not one post, but one lean-to that I had for years and years and years that lasted just fine. Your comments, Vince?
Sure. We don't throw oil away, used oil. We keep it all. But for the drain pans, we have a few. When I first started changing the oil back, when I was a teenager, it was one of those kitchen pots that my mom didn't want to use anymore. And it worked fine, I thought. But, as I got older, I bought one made by Chilton, Chilton, the same company that publishes books for automotive repairs. And it is a round one. It's black. It has a spout that comes off the one end of it. The other end of it has a handle and a vent cap. And in the center of this oil drain pan, it's about 10 quarts or so, it has a funnel shape, so it's depressed at the top, and you can unscrew the center cap, and the oil will drain through into this funnel area to the center point, which is the lowest point of it, and it works great. We're talking about some tools and specifically oil drain pans right now. So, class, there's one made by a company called Hopkins, Hopkins. We have one of theirs, and it only has one drawback. The hole in the center of the depressed area, which makes the top part of the drain pan, it's a completely surrounded plastic drain pan. It's round, and it works really well, except the hole that the oil would drain into the cavity that holds the oil is small. Now, if you have a small 4-cylinder car, maybe a V6, maybe even a Chevy pickup truck, a half-ton that's not diesel, you'll be okay. But if you have a diesel that dumps a lot of oil really quickly, the oil coming out of the engine will overrun the size of the hole in this Hopkins oil drain pan. But if you don't have like an 11 or 12 quart system, like a diesel truck might have or a tractor, you'll be fine with this. But my advice to you is do not buy a drain pan that does not have a complete surround, meaning one that's like a pot. Don't buy one of those, because then if you can't dispose of the oil quickly and it sits in this container, it has an open lid. It's like a pot with no lid. So get one that has 3 features. That has a depressed area in the center. It's completely surrounded. It has a spout for emptying it with a cap, and it has a vent. Okay? And when you start your draining of the oil, open that vent, or the oil will bubble and it'll go splash outside the catchment area of the drain pan. And what you should do is save those boxes, those shipping boxes that, we're all buying things on the internet. So if you get big boxes, cut them flat and put them under your vehicle where you're draining the oil. So, and then the next question is, what do you do with the oil after you've drained it out? Kyle, what do you do? Other than the soak in the post. Do you ever? Go ahead. All right. We never get rid of it. We have oil for 15 or 16 years now, still here. So I bought some empty steel 55-gallon drums, and what we used to do is put the oil in the same container that it came in. So if we got a 5-quart jug or a 4-quart jug, we would drain the oil into the pan, then put the drain plug in after, drained overnight, put the drain plug in, the oil filter in, fill the oil filter with fresh oil, lubricate the gasket, put it in, and then pour the oil in. And then we would have this collection of empty oil jugs, and we put the oil back in them and put it in the barn, and they'd be lined up along the wall in the barn. And after we had about 200 feet, literally, of these things end to end to end to end on both sides of this barn, we bought some 55-gallon drums, and we poured out the oil into those drums. And what I try to do is put the same oil back in. So if it's diesel oil, it goes back in the diesel oil jug. So we've collected the oil based on whether it's automatic transmission fluid, diesel engine oil, or gasoline engine oil, and it's now in 55-gallon drums, because at some point we may want to heat our house with used engine oil, because that's what gas stations used to do.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, the shop that I used to be a manager of, the owner bought a waste oil heater and installed it into the top of the shop, and it produced an incredible amount of oil. And there's some incredible little inventions that guys have come up with about using different little tanks and having oil drop down in there and blowing. Take a little blower motor and put it on there. I'm actually thinking very seriously about trying to do that, because I must have, 30 or 40 of those 5-quart jugs at least. I gave a friend of mine who got a really good buy on a bunch of raw pointed posts, and he needed to do some fencing around his house, and he needed to borrow. So I gave him 15 of these 5-gallon or 5-quart jugs to use so that he could soak his posts before he put them in the ground. But anyway, so I don't have quite as many as I used to, but you definitely want to make sure that the oil you pour from the pan into these jugs are oil jugs, not something like windshield washer fluid jugs, because the windshield washer fluid ones are not compatible with oil, and they will disintegrate. And the sunlight or just the oil itself will cause it to disintegrate. The other thing that you're correct, absolutely correct, about having a larger hole in the middle of your oil drain pan and not using the open pans, using one that you can seal up. Because if you leave those open ones, I don't care if you're very careful, if you carry them out there, they're going to get full of twigs and pine needles and bugs and everything else. Then if you ever try to pour it out, it's just going to be a sludgy mess. So, yeah, made that mistake myself.
Yeah, so class, you want a sealed oil catch pan, drain pan, and I'm okay with the round ones. Now, for an automatic transmission, I think, if I find a rectangular one, I might go for that. But because changing automatic transmission fluid is messy, because most U.S. manufacturers don't put a drain plug in the automatic transmission pan, so it's always messy. Other than that, the round one is the way to go. Kyle, thanks so much, and we'll do this again. This was number 2 in the series of tools, an in-depth look at what you need to know. So, class, now you know oil filter wrenches and drain pans. Thanks so much, Kyle. Bert's coming up hour 2, and we're going to talk about, thank you, and we're going to be talking about Texas. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2. Bert's with us. Welcome, Bert.
Hi, Vince. How you doing there?
Hey. Real well. Bert, I sent you an email this morning. Did you get it before class?
I got something about a question about the moon.
Yeah. Yeah, and that question came from one of our instructors, David, in Illinois. And what he wanted to know, before we get into Texas, is he wanted to know if you are privy to any information that you could share regarding the moon being a transceiver, a relay station for the Internet. And, of course, there are propagation delay issues. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, propagation delay would be huge. offhand, I don't know the number, but I believe it's in minutes. And I know people have had, I have had problems with the Internet using geosynchronous satellites where we're talking about fractions of a second delay. So I would think that would just be a deal killer as far as surfing the Internet. Now, if you wanted to download software or something, more or less one way, I guess that could work, but it just seems awfully inefficient to transmit from the moon, not to mention what the heck would the power source be? I guess presumably solar cells. But I haven't heard anything about it. I had, it's interesting you brought that up because I actually had radio equipment that was designed to intercept some of the signals that the astronauts had when they were taking their moon shots. And I was just curious because, I said, hey, maybe NASA's censoring some stuff. I want to hear the live feed. So I'm familiar with both the communications we use in Earth orbit and as well as to the moon, which is, at least back when we were going to the moon, we were using 2 gigahertz for that signal and somewhere around 400 megahertz for Earth orbit. But giving you a long answer, but I just don't think it's practical. I haven't heard anything about it. Satellites, yes. Balloons, yes. But the moon, no.
Okay, I'm with you. I really am. I feel the same way. Okay, so what do you have for us today?
Well, and I know you've discussed Texas before, and might overlap some of your other instructors, but I'm going to approach it really from a science standpoint as best we can. And I think I'd like to start out by saying that we intersperse 3 completely distinct topics that are getting conflated into what happened in Texas, and that's climate, weather, and pollution. And those are 3 different things. Some cases interrelated, of course, but 3 different things. So I'll just take them. Let's talk about pollution first. So pollution is horrible, and I think we all agree. And, Vince, you and I are about the same age, and you probably remember how bad the air was in the 60s and 70s. It was horrible.
Yeah, I remember flying into San Jose and, back in the 80s even, and looking at this brown dome over the city. Yes, absolutely. And I remember they used to call it smog in Los Angeles. It was like you could cut it with a knife. It was so thick. It was choking thick.
Yeah, so
Yes.
The reason I'm entering pollution into this mix is a lot of people conflate pollution and climate change, and they're really different things. In fact, I think almost completely unrelated. I mean, pollution is horrible, and I don't know anyone except maybe, somebody with some chemical company that doesn't want to take safeguards, but I can't think of anyone that doesn't want clean air and clean water. And we've done such a tremendous job of cleaning up our rivers and the oceans, and especially the air in the last 50 years. The EPA did a good job. Cars if you look at the statistics on cars, we're somewhere around 2% of the pollution of a 1960s car. I mean, it's just amazing. It's not just the engines are cleaner, but all the pollution controls, how well they work, and how efficient the combustion is. So it's pretty amazing how cars have cleaned up. And the air, because that was the biggest contributor to the air, so the air's gotten better. So nobody wants pollution. And so that ties into some of the power plants. And I know you've probably had some other opinions on this, but one of the worst forms of generating power right now is coal. And coal does cause pollution. And there really is no such thing as clean coal, because no matter what you do, it still exudes a lot of pollution. And, more people die from radioactive poisoning from breathing in coal dust than anything from a nuclear reactor in the United States. Did you know that?
Yeah, absolutely. Coal is radioactive, and that's a concern with wallboard, because what has happened in the past is instead of using gypsum, which is dug out of the earth for the core of sheetrock / wallboard, what companies have done is they've said, what do we do with all this fly ash from these coal power generation plants? So what they did was right next to the power generation plant with this great big pile of white ash, they set up a sheetrock manufacturing company, and they mixed a little glue with it, and they got some, cardboard for the sides and the edges, and they made sheetrock out of coal ash, which is partly radioactive. Yes, I'm aware of that.
Yeah. Do you ever see a video of the amount of coal tenders that line up every day to deliver coal to a power plant? I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's just, and you can't see the end of the line of train cars. Well, and that's for one day.
We have them here. We have them here in Missouri, or we did. I'm not sure if they closed the one outside of Springfield, Missouri down, the power generation plant. But this would be like 130 cars long of a train just chugging along every day. Yes, I have seen it. You're absolutely right. It's mind-boggling. And you wonder, where is all that going? And you're thinking, is it going to California? I mean, where's the coal going from West Virginia to California? Where is it going? Or Kentucky to California? It's going here for this one particular power plant. You're right.
Yeah, some of it's going to China. They build new coal power plants like every week. So, we talk about cleaning up pollution, and we've done a great job in the U.S., but, China is just polluting the rest of the world right and left. But, so I bring that up. We want clean air. We absolutely want clean air, and we want more clean energy. So we want more solar and wind energy and water energy, which unfortunately there's not much water energy in Texas because of the climate. So that really is independent of anything to do with climate. And I've studied climate change, and I cannot find any serious evidence to say that man is a significant contributor to climate change. I mean, it may be there, but nobody's really proved that. And it's still a little bit of a science that's being studied is why we have these big cycles in climate change. Now, has the Earth been warming? Absolutely. We can track that. And has it warmed at a little higher rate? I mean, I'm talking, we're talking about hundredths of a degree per year since the Industrial Revolution, that all the industry that we had in the early 1900s, a little bit. But does that really explain why we have different climate patterns? There's been nobody that can show that it does. One thing we do know, and we've talked about this before on other topics, is we know the sun has a huge influence on the climate. Both the solar cycle, which is 11 years, and also different random occurrences in the sun of plasma and different types of flares that randomly come out. And I know we've discussed the event that happened in 1859 and how we should prepare for one that could hurt our power grid. But in terms of did climate change cause what happened in Texas? Well, I think it's the third topic, which is weather, and it's just a 100-year weather event. I mean, that's really what it was. It was just, everything hitting at once. They had temperatures so cold it didn't go above freezing during the day. I mean, that's amazing for those parts of Texas. So I don't see any evidence, and I'm willing to be convinced that anything man-made affected the climate that caused what happened in Texas. And I don't know how some of your other instructors have talked about that, but do you have anything you can add on that, Vince?
Well, my evidence would be chemtrails, weather modification, the HAARP array in Alaska. The Chinese have a weather modification array. So those are parts of it. And another part would be if you look at all of the oil burners in the Northeast, pretty much back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, probably even today, a lot of the older homes still use oil burners. And the oil burners would burn about 500 gallons of fuel oil per winter on average each. So you add up all those homes, all those flames, all the cars burning fuel, all the airplanes, and not as many today, but all the trucks and and gas power generation plants, all those flames are absolutely positively heating up the atmosphere. There's no question that there is in my world, there is an impact. But compared to the sun's way bigger. So do we have an impact? I believe yes. And I believe we need to be good stewards, just like when we cleaned up the automobile engines, truck engines, etc., that you discussed previously. We did a pretty good job of doing that. And the air is getting cleaner right now because people are not going back and forth to work as much as they used to. So all that being said, I do believe that there, in my opinion, and I am a minority opinion right now, and have been, and I haven't changed my mind in all the years I've been alive, that yes, we do have an impact on the climate. But does it compare to the sun? I think the sun is the 800-pound gorilla in the equation.
Well, the things you mentioned, I think those are things that have caused people to die. It's caused cancer, it's caused health problems, respiratory problems, asthma, disease. But how much does it? The climate is such a powerful force. To think that it's had a major effect, I'm open to being convinced. But everyone says, "Oh yeah, look at the tracking it through the years of the heating." But we've gone through global warming and global cooling in cycles that there's 100-year cycles and there's 1,000-year cycles. Did you know that when civilization was in the Mediterranean, early civilization many thousands of years ago, the Mediterranean was actually two lakes, and it didn't open up to the Atlantic Ocean. Gibraltar was closed off, and that was only, maybe 5 to 10,000 years ago.
Yeah. Class, you're listening to Bert. He's in California, Senior USA Prepares Science Officer. We'll be right back, and we're talking about Texas. What happened? What happened to the power, the electricity? It's called power. I'd like to call it electricity in Texas. With us, Senior Science Officer, USA Prepares. Bert, there's one other piece of anecdotal evidence I'd like to offer, actually a couple of little pieces, about man-made climate change. Now, we think about fossil fuels as a big component of that, but there are other components. So, for example, when we were moving from Virginia to Missouri, we would travel. I had a truck, a diesel truck, and I pulled a trailer, and easily 20 trips, moving with a 20-foot, 8x8 20-foot trailer. And some of the trips were in the summer, some were in the winter, some were, spring and fall. But in the summer and the winter, I noticed the temperature gauge that would measure ambient temperature outside the truck would increase as we approached Louisville, Kentucky. And it would get warmer, warmer, warmer. When we got to the center of Louisville, it would peak, and then it would decrease. And I'm talking about in the summer and in the winter, the temperature of Louisville, Kentucky was about between 5 and 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside, 20 miles out, 30 miles out, 40 miles out. And the reason I believe that's the case is not just the fossil fuels used to produce, movement of vehicles, trucks, buses, cars, etc., heating of houses and businesses, power generation plants, but the roofs, the black colored roofs of these flat, row houses and the black colored tar of the roads, etc. All of the black, absorbing heat material that in a condensed space where people are consuming energy, I believe, heated up the air. So that's just a little bit of anecdotal evidence. But I didn't want to, tie us up in that, but I just wanted to share that with you. That's a little more evidence.
Okay, sure. So let's talk about Texas then. And so what happened in Texas was basically a 100-year event where everything went wrong. And certainly there was a over-reliance on wind energy, but it was way more than that. So, you have different sides blaming each other, and really it was all of the above to blame. I mean, they hadn't planned for natural gas be transported through the pipelines properly because the pipe and the pumping mechanisms were above ground where they could freeze. But by the way, I think natural gas is probably one of the best fuels for creating electricity because it is way cleaner than oil and tremendously cleaner than coal. So everything went wrong. But one thing that can't work is some people say, well, if we just had more battery storage, then we could have gotten through it more. But the problem is, if you're not generating solar and you're not generating wind, then you have no way to recharge those batteries. So putting in massively more batteries is definitely not a solution, not to mention the pollution that's caused by the manufacture of those batteries, and then eventually even more bad for the environment is the disposal of those batteries after 5 or 10 years. So I think solar and wind are great to add in, but we need something better as a baseline. And I think right now that's natural gas. But, in the future it might be something like fusion reactor, which many companies are working on, which is very clean and very efficient. But that's probably at least 10 years away from being used in any significant amount. So basically everything went wrong in Texas. I mean, the natural gas didn't work. The nuclear, half of their nuclear plants shut down because the safety pumps and different. The reactor itself was fine, but a lot of the equipment that was attached to it froze and couldn't work. So it was just a problem on many, many fronts that hit Texas.
I've got a comment about that. So, class, you've all heard, if you're as old as Bert or I, in our 60s, you've all heard when you've made those calls that the recording that says the error tone, all circuits are busy. And the reason for that is the telephone network was designed for 5% blocking. What that really means is the telephone network capacity was designed for 95% of the calls to go through pretty much all the time. But there were peaks of calls like Christmas, Easter, where people would make an enormously high amount of calls, and they couldn't all go through. And the reason these networks were designed for 5% blocking is because it would cost probably 10 times more to make it no blocking. So it was an economics issue, and I think that's part of what happened in Texas as well. Bert's with us. Bert, any comments about what I said about telephone blocking and the design?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to look at it. It's another problem. I would agree with that, and that sort of can be an explanation for Texas. But on top of that, they decoupled from the rest of the power grid, so it was there wasn't any easy way that they could call up Tennessee or Oklahoma or Louisiana and get some power diverted over to them. Not to mention, I think some of those states had problems too.
Yeah, we all had problems. It was a pretty rough time. As a matter of fact, for solar, we didn't generate much solar at all. And for wood heating, we went through more wood in 10 days than we probably would go through in several months.
Are you talking about the Finelli Ranch? Or
Yeah. No, I'm talking about our farm, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I know you do have a lot of animals. So did you adapt any of the gerbil wheels to have your dogs be able to generate some power?
It was terrible. It was really terrible. It was so cold, even the burying of pipes below ground for water, we had one of them burst in the barn. Probably my fault because I didn't cover it up with enough dirt. But one of the pipes burst, and that we had one of our cattle waterers freeze. And this is a 300-gallon tank buried in the ground with dirt covering it for insulation, and flue pipes underneath it to take heat from deep in the ground to warm the water in this concrete. It's kind of like a septic system. If you combine a septic system with a toilet, that's what this thing is. So it has a float valve, and you bury it in. The cows walk up to it and drink. And it's got underground plumbing from a well. And that thing froze, too. It was so cold. So we had to put water heaters in a 100-gallon bucket for 2 of our calves. And we had to fill every day with a 120-foot hose the cattle water because the underground plumbing would freeze. And it was so cold that any water that remained in the garden hose while we carried it into a heated garage would freeze on the way into the garage. So it was a terrible situation. We were generating very little electricity. Any battery that wasn't fully charged froze and buckled. I'm talking about lead acid batteries. The animals were really having a tough time. We had to buy extra protein for the cows so they wouldn't freeze to death. And we had to buy a heated chicken waterer because the chicken water would freeze within, 30 minutes, 10 minutes maybe. So, and we had to cover the chicken coop with plastic so that they wouldn't freeze to death, and put an infrared heat lamp in there for them, to keep them warm. So it was heroic, and it was a full-time job just keeping the animals alive. Literally, no exaggeration.
You know, Vince, we've talked about plumbing before. I have a question for you. Which is worse and which is best in terms of freezing pipe? Copper, PVC, or the old-fashioned iron pipe?
Well, you know from Physics 101, Chemistry 101, Science 101, Earth Science 101, that water is the only substance known to man on our planet that expands when it's heated and expands when it's when it freezes. All of those pipes will burst except for PEX. PEX is the most resilient, but the PEX brass connectors, the elbows, the T's, etc., they break. So there really is no cast iron. Cast iron will freeze. Galvanized iron will freeze. Galvanized steel will freeze. PVC, CPVC, all of those, and copper will all freeze and burst. So they're all subject to that. So I don't have an answer. Now there was one called Quest, Quest, or Qwest, one of those two. And they said that would not burst when it froze. However, chlorine in the water destroyed it, so it leaked in the walls. So that was no good. So there is no good answer.
Yeah, interesting. So getting back to Texas, what do? Well, obviously they need more reserve power. They didn't have enough. And I don't know if that means, having some power plants just on standby. If it was up to me, I would have do a plan where you eventually move the coal plants to just be standby plants because they're such bad polluters. But it's going to take a while for them to figure out how to increase their power generating capacity. And then you have to say, well, it's a 100-year event. Does that mean it really won't happen again for 100 years? Or, I mean, if it's random, who's to say it won't happen in 5 or 10 years, right? So, but I think they're going to dig themselves out of it. It's just going to take a lot of work and a lot of thinking, and maybe it's time for Texas to reconnect to the national power grid.
Okay, or how about it being time for us to use less electricity? Because the economic models that we have in this country are all predicated upon growth. Okay, if there's no growth, the economy collapses. All companies want to grow bigger, sell more, more revenue, more profit, more sales, more everything. And how about using less electricity? How about becoming more efficient? How about turning the lights off? How about better insulation? How about changing the roof color? So if you live in a warm climate, you have a light-colored roof. If you have a cool climate, you have a dark-colored roof. How about closing the windows? How about having low-E glass? If you live in a warm climate, how about orienting houses so that they can be more energy efficient with passive solar? How about solar collectors for heating hot water? Those tubes that have reflectors on them so the sun heats the hot water so you don't have natural gas or an electric hot water heater. How about being smart about it? Seems like that's what we need to do. That's what the Finelli family's doing.
Yeah. Did you know that the new Apple headquarters building in Cupertino, the one that they call the spaceship, it's energy neutral. In other words, they can either heat it or cool it without necessarily having to draw any energy from the power grid.
Well, that's what they say. That's what they say. But, in the summer, when they have their air conditioning on, where do they dump that heat? So typically if you see if you see, a large corporation that has land, you'll see like a pond and it'll look like they've got a fountain in the pond, and what a great idea. You can see the ducks and the birds and the water spraying up. That is the heat sink where they dump the heat in the summer from the air conditioning system. Literally. That's what they're for. It's not for, it appears that it's a beautification project, but it really is a heat sink.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to this. I've seen the spaceship, at least images of it. I haven't been inside, so I really don't know. But I do know one thing, that when I worked at a bank and the toilets they flushed with hot water in the summer. And the reason is they use the water going into the toilets as a heat sink for the air conditioning system. Literally. So what happened is they would dump the heat that was in the air that was cooled by the air conditioning system. They would dump that into the fresh water supply that would then supply the toilets with water, and it'd be flushed. So it just dumped the hot water down the city sewer system. No kidding.
Yeah, well, as long as they don't accidentally reverse that flow.
Right. So what else have you gleaned and learned from Texas? What should we have? Should we have spent a little more money and insulated those natural gas well caps, so that that gas wouldn't freeze with the moisture in it? Because the guys who engineered this, they absolutely positively know that natural gas contains moisture. They know that moisture freezes at 32 degrees. They know that it gets below 32 degrees in Texas. So do you think that they should have insulated those wellheads to keep the natural gas from freezing in the pipes? Well, not the gas, but the water in the natural gas from freezing and clogging the pipes.
Well, I think they will now.
Yeah. And that's one of the problems with this deregulation. Deregulation means you can build it at the lowest cost with not too much oversight. And that's and socialism would be at the other end of the scale, where the government would control everything. So here there has to be a balance. And the problem is, I think from my perspective, not enough people are paying attention to the designs. And who approved these designs? Who approved these wellheads? What kind of engineering would be done where a real good civil engineer, a real good mechanical engineer, a real good hydraulic engineer wouldn't say, wait, hold it, where is the water trap for this natural gas so that we can drain off the water so it doesn't freeze in these pipes? At the low point where gravity pulls all the water into the pipe, and that's where it would freeze. Where are those guys? How come somebody didn't say, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. It'll work at 33 degrees, 34 degrees, 32 degrees, we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, well, they're probably not working for those companies. They're probably working at Tesla, the people that are smart enough to know that.
Yeah. Yep. So we did have problems with solar here because the sun wasn't shining. We had very little solar power, and we were prepared to fire up our generator, our diesel generator, at any point in time, and we actually thought we were going to have to do that. We were storing water in jugs so that we could, ride out the time interval, should the generator not start. And that would be a big problem because the animals, Bert, we are 100%, no question about it, dependent on AC power, Westinghouse power, 100 Tesla, Nikola Tesla, not Elon Musk Tesla. We're 100% dependent on electricity, and we cannot live without it, in my opinion. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I know on previous shows we talked about what would happen if the power grid goes out. So, the problems in Texas had to do with power generation. The grid itself, as far as I can see, was fine. It was really the generation. Now, the natural gas grid, if you want to call it that went out, supplying the natural gas, but the electricity was intact. And I think more and more, we're only going to be more and more reliant on electricity as a society. So we need to pay attention to how to keep it stable and to have extra capacity in it. And, we've talked before about electric cars, and I think electric cars are the future because they're simply so much more efficient than gasoline-driven cars. But that's going to put more of a burden on the power grid because everyone's going to be charging their cars, in their garage using that power grid, which I think is fine because we can generate electricity using, in California here, we use primarily natural gas, which is fairly clean, but we also use water power. We have some solar, and we still have some nuclear plants. But it's actually a very efficient way to generate power and have an automobile and to not use gasoline. And the engines themselves are just so much more efficient, and then generating the electricity is very, very clean, relatively speaking, than an auto and gasoline engine.
All right, we'll be right back. Bert's with us, and what are your thoughts about solar, Bert?
Well, I think solar's a really good source of power. The efficiency is not that high, but you have to put that in perspective of, where else was the sunlight going to go? So, if it's even 10% efficiency can generate a lot of electricity. Otherwise, the sun just converts it to heat. So I think solar's great. I think a lot of roofs are going to start seeing it more and more. In fact, Vince, have you seen this shingle that you can buy that's really combination shingle and solar panel?
Yeah.
So very innovative.
Elon Musk was working on that, wasn't he?
Yeah, there's a couple other companies working on it. So you can put that on instead of just putting solar panels over your roof. It's debatable which is better because the solar panels do wear out. I mean, a lot of people don't know. They just literally start producing less electricity every year. So you have to replace it along, just like you'd have to replace a roof, shake roof at least, not a tile roof could last 50 or 100 years. So I think there's a lot of future of solar, but the problem is that's not enough. I mean, if everybody put solar panels on their roof, it still would not be enough for all the energy that we consume.
Right, and I just did a quick calculation. I calculated the square footage of all the solar panels that we have installed. Now we have about half of them installed here at the farm, and they're all pointing south. They are not enough to run the farm every day. Now, when the weather is nice and sunny, yeah, except we can't do air conditioning with it. It's just we don't have enough watts or enough current to run the air conditioning system here in Missouri at the farm. But it can do everything else. And the square footage is roughly 1,000 square feet. 935 is my rough calculation. So it's probably close to 1,000 square feet. So if you had 1,000 square foot home and you looked at the floor space inside, that's the amount of solar panels that we have. That's the real estate aimed at the sun. And it's not enough. It's not enough. So when you think about solar panels, you think, I can get this little fold out thing. I can put it in the trunk of my car and, I'm good. I'm backed up. Nonsense. And I challenge anybody to prove to me that I'm wrong, because I know I'm not wrong. I live this way, and I know that it takes about 1,000 square feet to generate enough electricity, 1,000 square feet of solar panels in a good sunny day to run the farm. And we have a very efficient farm, extremely efficient. The lighting's efficient. Everything is as efficient as we can get it, and it's not enough. So what I'm telling you is if you're going to go solar, make sure you do all your homework, or maybe we should have a class on solar and you can call in with your questions and I'll be able to answer them, because I live this way. And I just don't want you to make a mistake and think that you can go to Harbor Freight or the Chinese factory tool outlet and get, these 3 little panels and an inverter and you're going to be good for, riding out the winter storm. That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And one other thing, Bert, about cars. I did a rough calculation. I don't have it in front of me now, but right now the grid, the power generation plants that we have, whether they be coal, gas, nuclear, wind, hydro, solar, all the above, combined are not enough to power electric cars if we were to do a conversion from gas and diesel to electric right now. The grid and the generation wouldn't be able to support it. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think two things that you can look at. We'll have to expand the grid gradually as more electric cars come online. But also, I think you hit on it. There's tremendous improvements we can make into efficiency for offices and homes. So let's hope that we could make homes and businesses more efficient from a heating standpoint and an electric standpoint. For instance, LED lights, that's such a no-brainer. Then that electricity will be available to use for automobiles.
Okay, so I'm at the studio right now. I've got the minimum number of monitors running. I've got 2 monitors, LED monitors. I'm running 2 computers instead of 3. I'm sitting with the lights off. There are 4 can lights in the studio, and there are 13 watts apiece, so 52 watts total. The light switch is off. Why? Because I've got the curtains open, and there's enough sunlight that I don't need to use the electricity. So what I'm saying, class, is you can start conserving energy with your light switch. You can take shorter showers. You can, instead of cooking small meals, you can cook bigger meals and boil that water once instead of 3 times a day or 4 times a day or every day. There are a lot of things that you can do to start saving electricity, and I think you should do it for your reduction in pollution and for your electric bill. You can do it. You can open windows in the sunny days to heat the house, close them when it's cold. That's what we do. You can use blankets. You can use extra layers of clothing. You can turn the thermostat down. Bert, any quick comments? We got just a few more seconds.
Let's get rid of generating cryptocurrency using massive electricity.
Yeah, and those of you who fly in these entourages in government and need to have your car flown, halfway around the world, knock it off. We don't need to do that. Bert, thanks so much for being with us today.